Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is, as we just heard, Björn Ognibeni. I'm from Hamburg, and I've been working on the intersection of digital innovation and marketing, business, all kind of stuff for like over 20 years now. And my imaginary job title is, as I always like to say, practical visionary. Yeah, I'm trying to find new trends before they really appear in the mainstream. I try to understand them, then do like keynotes and speeches about them. But I also help my clients actually implement them. Yeah, and that's the practical part. And that also helps me then again to more understand these trends. And I don't do that much in e-commerce. I'm more in automotive, telecom, but through all the stuff that's happening right now, and more I also do stuff in retail. And as we just heard, I'm a co-founder at the XRLab at the University of Münster, but that's a totally different topic. What we're talking about today is a course that I teach at UC Davis in California. It's called Rethinking Digital, and that's also a workshop series here in Germany. And the basic idea is, how can we rethink digital with concepts from digital China? Me, myself, I was always going to the US to find new trends, to find new interesting things. But like 10 years ago, I realized that there's not much coming out of the US lately. Yeah, AI changed this a little bit. But if you go to China, you realize that there are much more interesting things happening there than in Silicon Valley these days. And why especially China? It's because that's the only place worldwide that's not influenced by Silicon Valley. Yeah, because for political reasons, they have this digital firewall. But basically that means that it's an ecosystem that really doesn't get much influence from Silicon Valley in a direct way like everybody else on the globe does. And if you're in a different ecosystem, if you have different experiences, that's the place where you actually find different ideas. And that's why I think China is so interesting. Usually we don't look to China, and that's why we very often get surprised by things coming out of China. Yeah, here are a couple of surprises of the last couple of years. DeepSeek last year, yeah, electric cars, Temu, all these are surprises that we saw. Here's a rather recent surprise. Who saw this last week? Yeah. It is not Kanye West. It's a nice music video that actually was generated by a tool that calls Cdance AI. Who saw Cdance AI last week? A few more. Yeah, that was the first surprise of 2026, I think, and it comes from ByteDance. I think we all know what ByteDance is. It's like we have TikTok here from ByteDance, but it's a much bigger company. What we don't know probably is that ByteDance is actually, in terms of usage, the biggest AI company worldwide. Yeah, 50 trillion tokens every day are used. You see here how much Google AI, OpenAI, and Anthropic is using. It's smaller than ByteDance. And nobody knows this. Yeah, and the interesting thing is also, ByteDance is also an e-commerce company. How much revenue might a social network like ByteDance do? I think Amazon does like 830 or something billion worldwide GMV. ByteDance does 670 billion. Quite a high number. And again, very often when I talk about this, another surprise. And the interesting thing about ByteDance is it's not a social network, it's not an e-commerce company, it's not a company that provides, by the way, you get all the slides afterwards, so you don't have to take pictures. It's also a company that does AI technology or productivity suite. It's all of that above. And that's something that looks pretty totally alien to us. And that's the reason why China is so interesting. Yeah, because it's a kind of time machine where we actually can look into our own digital future. And now we'll come back to AI in the West. Yeah, if you want to visualize what's happening with AI in the West, I asked an AI and they came up with this. Yeah. It's a data center with a lot of money burning in it. Well, that's probably a good picture to have in mind when we talk about AI. I think you all know the numbers. It's economy level investments that they are taking, hundreds of billions every year. They plan to do this for another 5-6 years. Unbelievable. Yeah? And if you look at the economic side of it, it's actually much bigger than the dot-com bubble or the subprime bubble in 2008. And we all know what happened in 2008 when it burst. So it will be very interesting to see what will happen to the AI bubble. And what do we do with all this money? What are all these tech companies are trying to achieve? AGI, yeah? Artificial general intelligence, a kind of super intelligence that then rules the world and justifies all the money that we pour into this. That's the wild goose chase they are all on. What do we get until we're waiting for this AGI? Mostly bold ideas and cool demos. Yeah, and cool demos very often look like this. Yeah, and very often all the stuff that we are doing with AI also only gets stuck in the demo version phase. Like for example, Klarna, who wanted to fire all their service people 2 years ago because AI can handle that. Yeah, 6 months later they hired them back because they realized the proof of concept worked great. Yeah, the pilot worked great, but all the edge cases makes it extremely difficult to actually do this. Yeah, you actually need to have the people back, and well, that's a great example, I think, for demo versus scaled. And I think you're all are familiar with these numbers, and that's just one an old study from last summer, but there are others from PwC, Boston Consulting Group had another one. It's always the same numbers. Yeah, it always says every company nowadays does something with AI, but very rarely we see really economic value coming out of this. Not on a small scale, but on a large scale. Yeah, and that's a very common problem that we have there. That doesn't mean that everybody doesn't, like every speaker on the stage is talking about be AI first. Yeah, and every time I see this, I ask myself, okay, what does it mean? Yeah, very often I don't hear this. I don't hear any real concrete example for what does AI mean. And I have a good example. That's from my speech last year, Shein. I think here everybody nowadays knows who Shein is. Shein is basically an AI first company. And the interesting thing here is they are not using AI as a tool, but they are using it as a platform. Yeah, we don't go into this detail. You can maybe still watch my keynote from last year. We talk about Shein. That's a very good example. The interesting thing is nobody's talking about Shein as an AI-first company. But it's a good example for where the differences are between the West and China when it comes to AI. Yeah, we see AI as a tool that helps make existing processes more efficient. And it's always about the bottom line. It's about savings. It's about firing a couple of people and saving the money. In China, you use AI as a platform to actually rethink business models, come up with totally new business models, like the one from Shein. It's always about the top line. It's about growth. It's about getting more revenue. And that's a very different approach, right? And in China, that also means that you have a different focus. You don't chase AGI. The goal is AI diffusion, making sure that AI is scaled industrially. Yeah, really AI deployment everywhere. And as I said, I'm more familiar with the automotive sector. And I'm not sure, you probably all heard about Xiaomi, the third biggest smartphone brand. And the interesting thing is they announced that they want to go into electric cars. And 1,123 days later, they launched and actually start selling the SU7, yeah, their first electric car. It's an amazing car, really interesting. And they are actually using AI to produce it. And that looks then like this. And what we are seeing here is what is called in China a dark factory. And it's so dark because there are no people in there. Yeah, there's stuff going in and there are cars coming out, and in between there's a fully automated autonomous production of these cars. Yeah, and that's AI first. Yeah, it's not about the bullshit that we often talk about here. It's about being able to produce 40 cars per hour autonomously. Yeah, and that's what you should start thinking about when you think about AI. Think bigger. But we are talking about e-commerce, right? So do I have also interesting cases for AI? Sure. Livestream is a very interesting thing that we have been talking about when we talk about China and e-commerce. And what you're seeing here is the founder of JD.com, yeah, the biggest retailer in China, doing a live stream. The funny thing here is it's not him, it's a digital twin. Yeah, it's an AI agent selling stuff. And that's already 2 years old. Yeah, that's how the whole thing started. Now JD has a service called JoyStreamer, and they are actually virtual hosts for live streams, and they are actually selling stuff. Yeah, you see the number up there, 2.3 billion RMB. It's like $250 million in sales that these virtual hosts did last Double 11 season, 11th of November. And the funny thing is 80%, they are more successful than 80% of their human hosts. So pretty interesting thing, and that's really an application that generates real revenue. Yeah, it's not a test, it's something that is really happening. Another very interesting case that here nobody talks about, but I think we should talk about, is Accio. Yeah, Accio solves a problem that here probably is not much really of a topic. If I have something to sell, yeah, there are lots of solutions to do this, and they are actually doing lots of conferences, and you have a booth out there for every service that helps me selling stuff. The interesting thing is, where do I get stuff to sell? And that's where Accio comes in. Yeah, Accio actually helps me as an AI chatbot that builds me supply chains. Yeah, like for example, that's a real life example. Somebody wanted to sell Christmas slippers last Christmas season, and that's the prompt that he put into Accio. And then Accio does market research, helps you what could be a good design for Christmas slippers this season. Then it generates pictures, yeah, suggestions based on this research, what kind of slippers should you sell. And here comes the interesting part. And then it actually helps you to connect you to suppliers who can produce these designs that you have there. Yeah, pretty amazing. And the interesting thing is when you look to China, they are always trying to get the details right. Like for example, if you see this little chat button here underneath the supplier, you can chat with the supplier. You chat with him in German or in English. He sees Mandarin, replies in Mandarin, and you again see the answer in his language, in your language, and then you get an agreement afterwards. Yeah, that comes from the AI, comes from Alibaba, and where you see what you have agreed to. And the interesting thing is, these kind of AI translations is something that everybody here also does. Yeah, Google has translations forever. DeepL has great translations. But the detail here is that Alibaba guarantees that the translation actually works for you. Yeah, if there's a mistake in there, then it's Alibaba's fault. And that makes sure that you actually use this for this kind of business transaction. Yeah, the task here that Alibaba sees is they have to scale the trust that you have in these systems so they can actually be used for live business. Yeah, and then if you use this, then you actually have a chatbot and AI that creates physical products instead of just nice pictures. And I think you all heard about Alibaba, but I'm not sure if you're all familiar with the ecosystem around Alibaba. Yeah, they have a lot of e-commerce companies. They also have a lot of cloud and AI operations, media, and all these other things that you see here on this chart. And you can do on Alibaba QN something that we probably have heard today also for a couple of times. You can ask your AI to do something like book me a cool hotel in Hangzhou and the train to get there, and then buy me an umbrella or a hat depending on the weather. Yeah, that's something that we also talk about, that AI agents at a certain point will be able to achieve. The funny thing is, Q1 can do this today, yeah, because they have the ecosystem of all the different companies, like for example Fliggy, a travel agent. They have a map service that provides the weather information, and they have lots of e-commerce that buys me the hat or the umbrella, but they also have the technical infrastructure to do this. Yeah, and one of the things is they have to handle the payment, and that brings us to the second part of getting things right. They have tokenized mandates. You can make sure that when your AI agent goes out and buys something for you, there are clear guardrails that make sure that it doesn't come back with a car or something. Yeah, it comes back with the stuff that you actually want. And you need this to have, again, trust into the system, to actually use it. And people are actually using this. Yeah, this Q1 agent can be used by more than 100 million people today. Yeah, it's not a test. It's something that's really live and get actually used. And they call it a one-sentence purchase. Yeah, though I had 2 sentences, but you know what I mean. Yeah, and that's, I think, pretty interesting. What can we learn from this? That we have to find a way to get from demos to dollars. Yeah, we are still very often stuck in this AI sandbox or proof of concept or pilot thing. But to really unlock the value and the potential that's in there, we have to find ways to actually get there. And that means, for example, get the details right. Yeah, and here are 4 lessons that I think we can draw from this no bullshit approach. The first thing is aim for growth and revenue. Yeah, cost savings are nice, do the cost savings, perfectly fine, but you don't grow by saving on costs. Yeah, that's pretty simple, I think. The other thing is then go beyond demos. Yeah, really try to find the real problems and address them. Don't think about we do this tomorrow. You have to do this today, otherwise it won't work. And then, obviously, you have to think in ecosystems. Yeah, Alibaba and also WeChat, they have this extremely big advantage of being in ecosystems, because Chinese companies always think in ecosystems. We think in silos, and these silos are not interconnected, and that's a real problem. But somehow we have to find ways to replicate this super app approach that they have there in our open web. Yeah, Google is bringing stuff in there with their protocols that maybe one point, I don't know when, will achieve this, but that's also something that we have to work on. And the last thing, and I think the most important thing, is optimize for trust. Make sure that people can actually trust your solutions. Yeah, if it's a demo, it's nice. Yeah, but I won't really use it. Yeah, you can't scale users. You can't really achieve the aim for growth and revenue if people don't trust it. And very often we can't trust these systems nowadays. Yeah, and that's the reason why Boston Consulting and PwC and McKinsey don't find this economic value. Very often the trust is lacking, and that's something that we need to aim for. And we have to realize that these guys that we've been talking about for like 2-3 years, yeah, Shein and Temu, that was just the start. It's not stopping. Yeah, we see more waves coming in. With totally different companies. You know, as I said, I work for automotive. There I already see the BYD, Xiaopeng's, and all these other Chinese companies that are coming here with really great quality cars. And that's a very interesting thing, or a very important thing to realize. Shein and Temu are about, let's say, value, yeah, being cheap. That's their competitive advantage very often. These new companies that are coming in from China, they will bring in really good products, and that will be quite difficult actually to compete with them. There are also, for example, fashion companies that we will see from China that not bring in cheap plastic clothes, but actually luxury products. Well, that will be very interesting, and we always have to keep in mind when they are here, they are these really digital organizations that use all the stuff that we see with their no bullshit approach. Yeah, so stop getting surprised, look to China for this kind of information. And I think that's usually my last slide, not today, but usually the best lesson that we can get from China is learn to learn. Yeah, be willing to understand something fully before you know that it doesn't work. Yeah, that's, especially in Germany, we are very quick in knowing why stuff doesn't work, but without fully understanding it. And as we just heard, we do another China panel tomorrow on the main stage next door at 2 p.m. With 3 very able colleagues, and we have probably a very lively discussion. And there's a little cliffhanger to get you there. We'll talk, for example, about the different modes of e-commerce that you see in China. Yeah, here very often we only see the search-driven e-commerce, and that will be handled by the AI agents. Nobody show up in your store when you only do search-driven e-commerce, but they are alternatives, and you find them in China. So if you can't make it tomorrow, come to our workshops. That's might be also an interesting alternative. You find this more on my website, and you find the slides. If you haven't copied or took pictures from every slide already, you find this on my website under this URL. We have a very nice, lively WhatsApp community discussing all these things. If you want to join, you're welcome to do so. That's it, what I wanted to tell you today.
Hi Björn, Anna from Avato Systems Bertelsmann. The question is, I saw these pictures with all these boxes, and it's kind of a dystopian scenario. Who shall consume all of this?
That's a problem that nearly every company has right
yes.
now. Yeah? And the thing is, it gets cheaper when it comes from China. So you can buy more. Yeah, of course, sustainability is always an issue. That's also something that I always tell people when we talk about Shein as a company. The interesting thing is that a Western fashion company often has the problem like producing 30 to 40% that never gets sold. Shein is trying to not produce stuff that doesn't get sold. So that's probably most sustainable, is not producing anything that doesn't get sold. But of course that doesn't solve the other problems.
And one last question, do you see an opportunity when it comes to infrastructure, sovereign IT or cybersecurity from the European market? Because what we see there, I don't see us building these factories.
Well, the Chinese will build them if we
yes.
don't. And they actually are already building them in Hungary and Austria. So it's not like the Chinese only want to produce in China. They probably will also bring this here. But yes, there are huge opportunities. For example, the Americans burn all this money on LLMs, yeah, large language models. Yeah. And there are people like Yann LeCun, the ex-research head of AI research at Meta, who thinks that this is a dead end. Yeah, because we don't want to get too much into technology, but it's all it's not a deterministic, but a probabilistic AI. Yeah, it's all about probabilistic, and so. They will be certain limits that we meet where we don't get into, can't realize the applications that we want. Like, for example, robots probably won't work with these kind of humanoid robots, with these kind of large language models. And they are trying to build world models, yeah, that work totally different. And that's a huge opportunity. Yeah, while the Americans are chasing their AGI using LLMs, maybe the Europeans start working on totally different models. All the basic research that LLMs is based on already came from Europe. So maybe with next AI, we'll also do a little bit more than just providing the knowledge. Yeah, but that's, I think, one of the things that we can do.
Thank you very much. And these were mean questions, so thank you very much for answering them.
Do we have another question? Maybe over there?
Hi, Björn. Thank you very much for sharing these ideas and a little bit like thinking of the future, how the future is. And I have a question of how do you envision we can create this bridge of building what's coming next, in the sense that you mentioned that here in Europe, for example, we are silos. And for me, let's say a silo is this big company that, of course, they are worrying on surviving and, of course, on scaling. And a silo can be also a startup that is trying to create the next innovation for the bigger companies, but they are working in different paths, right? And in these super apps, of course, they are working inside the ecosystem. And what I see, one of the biggest challenges is that the startups are creating what they believe is the next step. And bigger corporations are worried in, well, growing, surviving. How can we bridge that so we can create these super apps? Because otherwise we will continue always working in silos.
Yeah, we probably won't be able to produce the same kind of super app that the Chinese have, like, for example, WeChat. I think Elon Musk is trying to achieve this with X. Maybe OpenAI is actually trying to get there, yeah, putting all the stuff into the ChatGPT app. They actually want to create a super app. But I think that's again a wild goose chase. More interesting is the approach that Google does, yeah, with these open protocols that, for example, then handles the e-commerce thing across all the different players. Yeah, that's probably an interesting thing. But before we talk about technology, I think it's more important to talk about philosophy. Yeah, that I think also a startup, when they start, they very quickly auto end up in organizing in silos. Yeah, the people who are doing the sales, who are doing marketing, who are doing product design, customer service. If it's just one person, yeah, it's not a silo. But if you hire a couple of people, you quickly put those people into departments, and then you have silos, and suddenly nobody is talking to each other anymore. And I think we have to overcome this. Yeah, the thing about Shein is not the technology, it's the fact that they, or actually it is a technology, but it's the fact that they have one consistent IT infrastructure that integrates the front end to the consumer, yeah, the mobile app, to the last element of the supply chain. And once you have integrated this, you can build these kind of applications across all silos, like Shein. Shein isn't a super app. Yeah, and that's probably stop thinking about silos is probably the first step to solve this problem.
Thank you very much. And maybe a follow-up on that. I mean, if you mentioned that, of course, the path to super apps, it's not a viable path for Europe, let's say. But anyway, Europe has to stay competitive, right? So in their own ecosystem, in their own world, so how can these bigger corporations can transition into this streamlined ecosystem that you're mentioning? Because, I mean, if they want to stay relevant for this future, they need to do something.
The problem is I only have 1 minute and I probably need a day to address this. It's a real problem. But right now we already have the problem of trying to think how can we get more independence from these American tech players. So we are already at a point where we think about change, or we should think about changing things. And maybe that's an opportunity to start getting to the bridge. If we get to the other side is another question, but that's probably a good opportunity to use.